Welcome to section 20.11 of metabolism. In this video, we will focus on memorizing the details of vitamin D. Let's get started. This little park area is the setting of our vitamin D story. We will start off by discussing how we obtain vitamin D for our bodies. Vitamin D can come from many sources, for example, from milk. See this nice milk truck driver delivering milk all around the neighborhood, giving vitamin D to all people. Now notice this awesome little fountain with fish in it. This will help you remember that vitamin D is high in fish, so eating fish can provide you with a lot of vitamin D. It wouldn't be a park without some pretty plants and flowers. These plants and flowers represent the idea that you can obtain vitamin D from various plants. Now look at this bright, shiny sun. You may have heard how the sun can provide you with vitamin D. Now this occurs because the UVB rays reach the 7-dehydrocholesterol of your skin and convert it to active vitamin D3. Now this process is discussed in detail in the calcium homeostasis lecture within the endocrine physiology chapter, so we won't go into any more detail here. Fungus is another good source of vitamin D. I guess all that water from the pond is good for the flowers and the fungus, because both are growing rampant. Now let's look at this awesome Dalmatian dog. He has one very prominent spot on his belly that looks like a liver. This liver-shaped spot will help you remember the involvement of the liver in vitamin D activation. The liver hydroxylates vitamin D to 25-hydroxyvitamin D. And this Dalmatian is looking right at this nice healthy patch of kidney beans. This patch of kidney beans helps emphasize the role that kidneys have in vitamin D synthesis. We learned that the liver produced 25-hydroxyvitamin D. The kidney then takes this 25-hydroxyvitamin D and hydroxylates it further, this time at the first carbon, creating 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D. This is the active form. Within the endocrine physiology chapter, there's a lecture on calcium homeostasis, which details how vitamin D is formed. To get a solid understanding of the physiologic regulation of vitamin D, calcium, phosphate, and PTH, I highly recommend reviewing that video. But very briefly, when calcium is low, the parathyroid glands will release PTH. PTH will then act on bone, which will then release calcium and phosphate. PTH will then act on the kidney, which will cause phosphate excretion and calcium reabsorption. Then PTH also acts on the kidney to stimulate 1-alpha hydroxylase, which converts 25-hydroxyvitamin D to 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, the active form. Now this active form of vitamin D, cholecalciferol, then acts on the intestines and the kidneys, increasing the absorption of calcium and phosphate. And this calcium and phosphate can then be used to make bone. Now let's turn our attention to this little dog pound on the right. These cages are for locking up little dogs. So everything in this region that we will discuss will represent vitamin D deficiency. Look at this little guy. He's even wearing a vitamin D shirt. So dogs wearing vitamin D shirts locked in a cage for vitamin D deficiency. Now when vitamin D is deficient, bones will be weak and they can bend, causing rickets in children, which is bowing of the legs. Now look at this poor dog with his bowed legs. Really though, some dogs just have front legs that look like this, and it just kind of looks like bowed legs. Now whether or not this is the dog's natural body position, as opposed to pathology, these cute little bowed legs will help remind you that vitamin D deficiency can cause rickets. Now look at this poor caged dog. It tried to escape, and as a result, it broke its leg on the cage. You can even see its little bone sticking out. Now the bone trauma of this locked up dog represents osteomalacia. Vitamin D deficiency can cause osteomalacia, or decreased density of bones, especially in adults. This makes patients more prone to bone fractures like this dog. So this bone damage to the locked up dog stands for osteomalacia in vitamin D deficiency. Now look at these cute little puppies here. Look at them trying hard to get milk from their mom. Infants that receive nutrition exclusively through breast milk are at an increased risk of vitamin D deficiency. Breast milk does contain vitamin D, but not very much of it. Nursing mothers must be taking a lot of vitamin D in order to come even close to giving their infant an adequate amount of vitamin D. Formula milk is fortified with vitamin D, so formula-fed infants aren't at high risk of vitamin D deficiency. So these little puppies breastfeeding behind the locked cage will help you remember that breastfed infants are at an increased risk of becoming vitamin D deficient. Now look at this food dish for the mommy dog. It's completely empty. She has to eat too. Poor hungry dog. In any case, this empty food dish represents the fact that not eating enough or just poor nutrition can lead to a vitamin D deficiency. Notice how the fur on all of these dogs is dark brown? This represents that people who have a darker complexion or higher amounts of pigment to their skin are at an increased risk of vitamin D deficiency. As we mentioned before, the sun is a good source of vitamin D. However, in people who have darker skin and higher pigment, it resists notice the sun's effects. So again, dark dogs at risk of vitamin D deficiency, dark humans at higher risk of vitamin D deficiency. While on that thought, did you notice how dark it is in these cages? These dogs aren't receiving adequate sunlight, putting them at high risk of vitamin D deficiency. So in addition to just being a darker person, not going out in the sun at all can also put you at risk for vitamin D deficiency. Now look at this dog pound worker who is gathering up food for the poor animals. He is picking withered and dying kidney beans to feed them. Not a good meal, I'd say. But these wilty kidney beans represent kidney failure. If the kidneys aren't working, 1-alpha-hydroxylase cannot hydroxylate 25-hydroxyvitamin D to 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, as we discussed before. Now look at this janitor trying to mop up all of the spilled water. As you can see, it's not mopping up very well. He should probably give up on this idea because grass does well with water anyways. In any case, this poorly absorbing mop represents intestinal malabsorption, and vitamin D is absorbed through the intestines. If the intestines don't function properly, then vitamin D will be lost in the stool, and the patient will become deficient. So now let's talk about excess vitamin D. This part of the discussion will be located outside of the dog pound, higher in the image. The first consequence of excess vitamin D is hypercalcemia. Notice the sinister looking dog chewing on the bone of this deer. It looks like he killed the deer in the forest and then dragged it across the street to chew on it. Look at these little crystals falling off the bone. As we discussed before, PTH can act on bones, causing bones to release calcium into the bloodstream. So this bone dust represents high calcium. Now all the blood surrounding this scene will help you remember that calcium is high in the blood, so hypercalcemia. Now let's talk about hypercalciuria. Look at this sweet old grandma walking her little dog. This little dog seems to be terrified of the bigger, aggressive-looking dog who continues breaking bones into calcium dust. I don't blame the little guy for being scared. Well, this fear caused the small dog to pee all over the ground uncontrollably. He urinates in fear of the dog who created the calcium crystals, urinating in front of calcium for hypercalciuria. The final important detail of vitamin D excess is to recognize that it can be caused by granulomatous diseases, such as sarcoidosis. Again, I bring your attention to this sweet little grandma. She will help you remember granulomatous diseases. In these granulomas, macrophages can activate vitamin D, which then of course leads to hypercalcemia and hypercalciuria. And that's all you need to memorize about vitamin D.